Hello everybody and welcome back to another video of English No Big Deal. My name is David.
And I'm Maddie.
In today's video, we're going to do part 2 of Conversation 18. And just like any of the previous part 2 videos of all the previous conversations, we're going to go over 15 most important phrases of this conversation. And before we get into that, we have to ask Maddie why this conversation is important and what you guys can take away in this conversation to apply in your daily communication. So Maddie, can you tell them why this conversation is important?
This conversation is important because it is about struggles at work. We all experience struggles in our life, whether they're at work, at home, anywhere. And being able to talk about this effectively is really important, especially if you want to find a solution for your problems. So learning the vocabulary and phrases within this conversation will definitely help you speak smoothly about any struggles you're having. That's why it's important to learn all of the phrases we are going to share in this video. And be sure to follow along and create your own examples. That way these phrases make more sense to you. And don't forget, after watching this video, go back to the previous conversation in order to check your understanding. Now, if you do find this video helpful, be sure to like it and also subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on the next video. Now, let's get into it.
Number 1. To fill in for somebody.
Hey Maddie, do you have a sec?
Yeah.
Do you know anyone who could fill in for me next Friday? Something suddenly came up, so I need that day off.
There are 2 pronunciation points for this phrase. The first one is the vowel of the word fill, and the second point is about the connection between the word fill and in. Now, going back to the first one, we have the word fill. Fill has the vowel of the short E sound, right? And so when you say this word, make sure you have that short I sound. So, fill, fill. And make sure you don't pronounce this word with the long E sound, because if you say with the long E sound, it's gonna turn out to be the word feel. And feel is a completely different word. So, fill. Feel. It ends with the L sound, and that's why we have the next point of linking the L sound at the end of this word to the word in, which is standing next to it. So fill in, fill in, to fill in for somebody. Now say this whole phrase with me one more time. To fill in for somebody, to fill in for somebody, to fill in for somebody.
Now, this is a phrasal verb. And what it means is if somebody is filling in for somebody, then they're doing that person's job for a short period of time. That doesn't mean that this person is permanently taking their position. They're only going to do it for a short period of time. Now, be sure to use the preposition for. Going back to the conversation, David asked Maddie if she knows anybody that could fill in for him on Friday. So he's asking if there's anybody available to do his job only for Friday, not for the rest of the week, not permanently, just for Friday. And that is it for the explanation. Let's give you some examples so this phrase makes more sense. The first example: substitute teachers are for filling in when people are sick. Now, it is a substitute teacher's job to temporarily take on the workload of the regular teachers. And I'm pretty sure all of us have had a substitute teacher while in school.
Maybe because the official teacher was sick, or they had something very important to do and they couldn't attend the class that day. So the school had somebody as the substitute teacher to take on the class that day for them. Now, moving on to the next example. we have to postpone your vacation because we were unable to find anyone to fill in for you. Just like how Maddie already explained, that when you want to take some days off, whether it is for your vacation that you are going or taking with your family or friends, you have to ask your manager in order for them to prepare somebody to fill in for you, right? And in this case, you have to make sure that while being away, your work still has to be done by somebody else.
Unfortunately, this time, since they were unable to find anybody who could properly do the work while they were away, the manager told them they have to postpone their vacation, because if they still went on vacation, then the work wouldn't be done. And of course, that's not good for the company. So that's why it's important to make sure that somebody can fill in for you temporarily while you're away. Number 2, to bring something up with somebody.
I can't think of anybody who could fill in for you, but that's something that you should bring up with management.
For this phrase's pronunciation, we're going to concentrate on 2 words, the words bring and up. For the word bring, be careful to not skip the sound. Don't say bing, bing, not correct. Bring, bring. And for the last one, up, don't forget to have that p sound at the end. Up, up. Now say this whole phrase with me one more time. To bring something up with somebody. To bring something up with somebody.
Bring means raise or mention. So when you bring something up with somebody, that means you're raising a subject or a matter to discuss or to consider with that person. It's pretty much similar to the phrase to talk with or to speak with somebody. When using this phrase, you gotta use the preposition with. So to bring something up with somebody. And don't ever forget that. Now in the conversation, after asking Maddie if she knew somebody who could fill in for David so he can take that day off in order to take care of his personal problem, Maddie stated that he should bring up the matter with the management. That means that the matter that David just brought up with her was kind of beyond her ability or authority. That's why he shouldn't have mentioned that to Maddie. And he should bring up the matter with management because they were the ones who could decide whether or not he could take that day off. Now, let us give you some more examples so you know how to use this phrasal verb more accurately. And the first example is, the easiest way to ruin a relationship is to bring up your personal excuses with them all the time.
That is so true. I can't mention the amount of times I felt like I shouldn't even be friends with this person because they kept talking about excuse after excuse for any situation, and sometimes those excuses didn't even make sense. So, as David already said, this is the easiest way to ruin a relationship.
And that's why there's a saying that if you like doing something, then you'll find a solution. But if you dislike doing something, then you'll find excuses, right? And most people don't want to hear your excuses. They love to hear your solutions, or they love to hear your help on their problems.
And the second example, in an effort to get promoted, she brought up all of her past successes with the boss. So all this means is she started talking about all of the success she's had while at the company because, of course, she wants to get promoted. And in her mind, there's no better way to impress the boss than to bring up all of her successes.
Saying something like, you remember all the accomplishments I made before for the company? That's why now you have to promote me. Number 3, to brush somebody off or to brush off somebody.
Yeah, I tried to mention it to Jay, but he seemed to brush me off and said,
It's very easy to notice that the hardest part of this phrase's pronunciation is the sh sound at the end of the word brush. And after it, if you have the word off, then you can link the sh sound to off. You have brush off, brush off, brush off. But be careful because don't ever turn the word off into the word of because those words are totally different from each other. So of starts with the sound and ends with a V sound, while off starts with an O sound and ends with an F sound. So off, off, and then link it, brush off, brush off. Now say the whole phrase with me in two different ways. The first one is to brush off somebody. To brush off, brush off, brush off somebody. To brush off somebody. And the other way is to brush somebody off. To brush somebody off. To brush somebody off.
Now, what this phrase means is that if you brush somebody off, that means you ignored them or their concerns in a rude way. Now, this phrase has so many synonyms like dismiss, disdain, or even disregard. But native speakers tend to use this phrase over these more formal words because it doesn't sound as critical. So for example, if you say somebody brushed you off, then you won't sound too flippantly. In the conversation, David said that when he tried to mention the matter to Jay, he seemed to brush him off. Now, all this means is it seemed like Jay ignored him and dismissed his concerns in a really rude way. But it's not as critical, so he's not going to use the more formal words like he disregarded what I said. Because if he did say it that way, then Maddie would take it in a more critical way and the whole thing would seem more dramatic. Like maybe the manager or the person he was talking to wouldn't be a really good person to be in charge if he completely disregarded someone else's concerns. So that's why David said, brush off in this situation. Now moving on to the examples. The first one. You shouldn't have brushed me off when I told you the basement was about to be flooded because now it's going to cost a lot of money to fix it. So when I originally brought this matter up to the person saying, hey, the basement's about to be flooded, they didn't seem to care too much. They kind of ignored in a rude way, being like, nah, I don't think it's going to be flooded. And that is why now we're using brushed off. Because first of all, they weren't completely disregarding what the person said. They're acknowledging it in some way, but they're still not taking it seriously. So that's why we're using brushed off.
And I really do like the way that you use this phrasal verb in this particular sentence or situation because it falls right in the middle of the range between ignore, which has the lightest effect, and disregard or dismiss, which has the most intense effect. And the second example that I have is going to give you more of that idea. Brushing people off is not only rude, but you're closing yourself off from learning new perspectives. I think we all do this as sometimes we do have some reasons in mind of doing something, so we refuse to listen to those around us. Sometimes they talk about something that's really good for us. They're talking about some of the solutions that are more feasible or doable, but just because we have or we are fixated on those ideas in mind or those reasons in mind, so we close ourselves off from learning their ideas, their opinions, or their perspectives. And that's why not only is rude, but you're actually missing out the solutions to your problems.
Reflecting back now, I feel like that's something that a lot of us do during our teenage years when our parents are trying to tell us how to do something that's good for us. I know I did this as a teenager and I constantly brushed off whatever my mom was saying, being like, yeah, whatever, you don't get it, you're an adult. And that, of course, was closing myself off to some of the solutions that she was presenting.
And maybe at some point in the future, you're going to turn to your mom or your parents in order to ask her or them why you didn't tell me anything about that, right? And mom is going to say, yes, I tried so hard in order to tell you everything, but you brushed me off.
Number 4, to let or get somebody off the hook.
Jay is pretty rigorous about the schedule, but did you tell him exactly why you need the day off? Because I know that if it's for something like a doctor's appointment or something else that you absolutely cannot cancel, then he'll let you off the hook.
For the pronunciation, we're going to concentrate on the word hook. Hook. Now, even though it is spelled with a double O, we do not say ooh, ooh. We don't say hook, hook. Not correct. We say hook, hook, hook. Now say the whole phrase with me. To let somebody off the hook and to get somebody off the hook.
When you're off the hook, that means you're no longer in a difficult or unpleasant situation or having to receive any punishment for the action you've done anymore. In the conversation, Maddie said that if David's excuse to take that Friday off was valid or legitimate, then the boss was going to let him off the hook. That means if the validity of his excuse is good enough, then the boss was going to accept his reason of taking the Friday off without giving him any punishment. Or in short, his case is going to be an exception to the company's regulations of days off because of the validity of his excuse. Now, if you have understood all the usages of these phrases, let us give you some more examples so you can practice along. And the first one is, when I got pulled over for speeding, the police officer told me he was going to let me off the hook because it was my first offense.
You hear this a lot of the time when people are talking about, oh, I just got pulled over, but he let me off the hook because blah, 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 blah. So police officers usually don't want to, 1, waste their time with the paperwork, and 2, if they're not speeding that badly, then most of the time they'll be let off the hook. They're not going to receive a fine or any type of punishment for speeding. And the second example, poachers should never be let off the hook because they're hunting down endangered animals. So poachers are doing a very bad thing, and if they're caught, they should not be let off the hook and always receive some sort of punishment. That way, they never do that thing again.
I think in some countries or some areas of the world, poaching is considered as a crime. And so if you go into a forest or go into a wild area in order to hunt an endangered animal, then it's going to be considered as a crime that you just commit. And for that, you can be put in jail or you have to pay a lot of money as a fine. Number 5, to strike off somewhere.
I was gonna tell him, but I didn't get a chance. He struck off way too fast.
I think the pronunciation for this phrase is basically about the connection between the words strike and off. Because strike has that k final sound, and off starts with an R sound, like I said before. So you link the k sound to off, you have strike off. Strike off. Now say the whole phrase with me 1 or maybe 2 times for you to get familiar with it. To strike off somewhere. One more time. To strike off somewhere. To strike off somewhere.
Now, to strike off has many different meanings, but we're only going to concentrate on the way that it was used in the conversation. So David said that the boss struck off just way too quickly before he could say anything. Now, strike off here means to go someplace with a purpose and energy. So maybe when David was talking to the boss or trying to talk to the boss, he was busy trying to manage something else, or he was already trying to go someplace. So that's probably why he cut David short and struck off just way too quickly to go to the next meeting or go someplace else. Now, this is pretty similar to my first example. Usually after the board meetings, the CEO strikes off to the next, but I don't know why today he's lingering around. So usually after the board meetings, the CEO has another meeting to attend to. So he has to go to that meeting with a purpose and energy. So that's why he strikes off. But today he's standing around. So I guess maybe he doesn't have another meeting to attend to.
Maybe because with the meeting he's just finished, he still has some concerns with the people there, so he decided to stay around for a little bit longer in order to address them. Now, coming up to the next example, during my high school years, I usually struck off to school all alone. And the reason I went to school all alone was because maybe I was the only child of the family, or I didn't have any friends that lived in the same village but went to the same school. So that's why I struck off to school all alone during those years.
And of course, you're going to school with a purpose and energy. Well, at least I hope you are. And so that is why you struck off to school. You're going with energy and a purpose.
Staying at home was going to be boring for me because I didn't have anything to do. But going to school was a completely different story because I had a lot of friends to talk to and have fun with.
Number 6, to favor something or to favor doing something.
Yeah, it's the same for me. Somehow I favor using email with the clients and face-to-face communication with our colleagues.
There's really only one word that we have to concentrate on, and that is the word favor. Favor. Be sure that you don't change that v sound to a f sound. So don't say favor, favor. This is a common mistake that I've heard a lot of people make. So be sure that you have the v sound down. This is a voiced sound, so of course you should feel the vibrations. Favor, favor, favor.
Favor means prefer when it is a verb, and in the conversation, Maddie said that she favored using email with her clients and face-to-face communication with her colleagues. That means that she likes using emails, sending emails to her clients, and that's the main way or the means of communication that she prefers using with her clients. But when she communicates with her colleagues, she prefers talking with them in person. And because this word is pretty easy, and I know that you guys have already understood how to use this word correctly, let us give you some examples right now so you have something to practice with. The first example is, I favor working from home over a 9-to-5 office job. That means I just prefer working from home so I can be my own boss. I can manage my own time and I can show up wherever I want. Or I do have enough time to take care of my family rather than having to attend to the office all the time when working at an office or working for somebody.
I think a lot of people would prefer now to work from home over working in the office. Now for the second example, I favor getting things done along the way rather than leaving them to the last minute. Now, this just means that I prefer or I like to do things along the way because if I leave them to the last minute, then they build up and I could feel overwhelmed at the amount of work that I have left to do. So it's just easier for me to do them along the way. That's why I prefer or favor doing it this way.
Number 7, face-to-face.
Somehow I favor using email with the clients and face-to-face communication with our colleagues.
Now, I believe this one is the easiest one on the list in terms of pronunciation. So for its pronunciation, all you need to do is to focus on the S sound of the word face. Face to face. face to face. And don't try to say the word too much like that. So instead of saying to, you can turn it into ta. So face to face, face to face, face to face. And that is the best way or the fastest way to say this phrase.
Now, what all this phrase means is direct or in-person communication. So no talking over the phone, no texting, or even FaceTiming. You can't say, oh, I'm talking to them face to face over FaceTime. That's not how this works. It is in person. In the conversation, Maddie said she favors using email with her clients and face-to-face communication with colleagues. So all this means is she prefers in-person communication. So no texting, no emailing her colleagues, but face-to-face communication.
That means the two people are sitting in front of each other, or they are sitting in a room talking to each other so they can really hear the sound from each other's mouth, or they can also have that direct interaction so they can enhance the quality of the communication.
So for example, David and I can say we are having a face-to-face talk or face-to-face communication. We're seeing each other in person. Now let's give you some examples. I prefer having face-to-face conferences over virtual ones because I can make better connections with people. If you're having a virtual conference, a lot of people won't even have their cameras on. You can't see anybody. And also, if you turn on the microphone, everybody can hear you. We all know this mistake has been made multiple times. Some people leave their microphone on and everyone hears you. So that's why I prefer face-to-face conferences, because if I want to whisper to the person next to me, that's always an option. Not everybody's going to hear me. And along with that, you can see the people there and decide to engage and talk with individuals. You don't really have that option over virtual conferences unless you personally message somebody in the chat box maybe. So it's not really a valid option for making better connections in a virtual conference.
And this is very important when you are the main speaker of that conference, because when you speak to people or when you are teaching them, you're trying to hold a meeting with them or a conference with them. You want them to interact with you. You want them to be engaging in the conversation or whatever you're talking about, right? And so sometimes it's just really hard for you to see it if it is a virtual one, right? And so when you see some of the action that they have that shows some disengagement or distraction, then you can actually ask them some questions in order to pull them back to the presentation. And the second example that I'm about to make will have the same idea as well. Face-to-face interviews are more likely to help employers find the best fit for their positions.
I think because if you are trying to conduct an interview over Zoom or any other type of virtual meeting room, you can't always get the best feel for the candidate because maybe you're not seeing some of the other body languages that they're having. You're only seeing their face. And body language is a really great indicator of whether the person's being honest, respectful, whatnot. And that's why having face-to-face interviews is more likely to help the employers. Number 8, in regards to and with regards to.
So I'm gonna tell the truth that I need that day off to go see a counselor in regards to some of the struggles I have at work.
Now we're only going to concentrate on one word, and that is the word regards. Be careful and do not change the d sound to a t. Don't say regards. Regards. Not correct. Regards. Regards. Listen to me and hear how I have the d sound clearly. Regards. Regards. Now say it with me. Regards. regards.
These phrases have a lot of synonyms, such as in relation with respect to, regarding, respecting, and relating. And they all mean that the person talking is concerned about the subject that comes after these words or phrases. In the conversation, David said that he was gonna go see a counselor in regards to some struggles at work. That means he's more concerned about these struggles as reasons that he had to go see a counselor. Now, if you know how to use one phrase, that means you're gonna know how to use all of them. So let's give you some more examples right now so you know how to use these phrases better. The first one is, in regards to our current financial situation, I think finding a roommate is a great solution.
So you're concerned about the financial situation, and the solution that you have is finding a roommate. This is a great way to cut down on the expenses of rent or even mortgage. So to solve the problem you are concerned about, in this case, you are going to find a roommate. Now, the second example, we are calling you with regards to your recent transactions as they seemed suspicious. So the bank here is calling me. They are concerned about some of the recent transactions on my account as they seemed out of the norm. So that is why the bank is concerned about them and calling me in regards to those transactions.
I think there are so many reasons that the bank will call you. And as a person who's receiving that phone call, if you don't know what the phone call is all about, you might freak out a little bit, right? So by saying that first sentence, it helps you focus on the matter that the person is talking with you about. Number 9. Something doesn't sound ideal.
That doesn't sound ideal. If you don't mind me asking.
Now, all the pronunciation points are lying upon the last two words of this phrase. The first one is sound, sound. Remember that I told you guys in all the previous conversations or videos that you should enunciate the middle end sound of a word. So, sound. In this particular word, the end sound is supposed to be pronounced very distinctly. And it ends with a D sound while the next word is ideal. Starts with a vowel, I, ideal. So you can link the D sound at the end of the word sound to ideal. You have sound ideal, sound ideal, sound ideal, sound ideal. And the last point for this phrase's pronunciation is ideal. So this word has two syllables. The first one is I, and the second one is deal. Deal. Most people are struggling pronouncing the second part of this word. So they'll say something like ideal, or they'll say something like I do, something like that. But notice that the second part or the second syllable of this word contains the vowel of a long E sound. So ID, and then it ends with the L sound. So you stick your tongue up in order to make the L sound very clear as well. So you'll have ideal, ideal, ideal. And when you say the whole phrase, it's gonna be something doesn't sound ideal. Something doesn't sound ideal.
Now, the word ideal itself means perfect and can also be used to talk about the standard. So if you call a situation ideal, that just means it is perfect. But if you call somebody ideal, that just means that they meet all of your standards. Now, if you say something doesn't sound ideal, this is just a fun or sarcastic way of saying something's bad, it's not a good situation, or it's not going as you expected. And that's exactly what Maddie meant when she said that doesn't sound ideal after knowing that David had to go see a counselor. Now going into the examples, the first one, not being able to afford your tuition fees doesn't sound ideal. Now, this statement is a little bit sarcastic. A lot of people know that that's not a perfect situation of not being able to afford your college tuition fees. So by saying it this way, it's a fun and sarcastic way to kind of lighten the mood of the topic. So not being able to afford your tuition fees doesn't sound ideal. It doesn't sound perfect.
And the second example that I'm about to make will follow that same line. It doesn't sound ideal if you just keep changing your careers like you did in the past 5 years. Like Maddie already explained, that if something doesn't sound ideal, that means it's not perfect. It's not something that people would normally expect something turns out to be. And no one wants to switch jobs all the time like that, right? Because when you get to a new place or a new job, you have to take some time in order to get used to it. And so it takes a long time to actually be on top of that job as well. And if you just continue switching jobs or changing jobs, that means you're not going to go that far in any of the jobs that you are enrolling in.
I think another thing to take note of is this is probably a sarcastic comment and the person is most likely teasing. You would know this by listening to the tone of the person's voice. If they say it like this, it doesn't sound ideal that you've been changing your job a lot. With that tone, they're not meaning any kind of harm. They're joking around with you. So just be aware of that. Number 10, in hopes of or in hopes that.
If you don't mind me asking, then I'd love to hear more about it in hopes that I could be a good listener and confidant.
For the pronunciation for this phrase, we're going to concentrate on the connecting between hopes and of. Now, hope itself can either be in plural or singular in this phrase, so we're going to do the connecting for both. The first one, in hopes of, you can bring that s over to of and say sov, hopes of, hopes of. And the next one, in the hope of, in the hope of, you can bring that final p sound over to of. In the hope of, pub, in the hope of. Now say all of this with me one more time. In hopes of, and in the hope of, in the hope of.
As Maddie already mentioned that the word hope can be in both singular and plural. So you can actually say in the hope of and in the hope that. And these phrases mean that you are hoping to accomplish something or you're expecting something to happen in some certain way. In the conversation, Maddie said that she'd love to hear more about David's struggle in hopes that she could be a good listener and confidant. And that means she was expecting herself to be the person who could listen to David when he had a lot of struggles at work. And that was the best way that Maddie could help him. Coming up to the examples, and the first one is, I went to see a doctor in hopes that he can find out why I was so sick.
So what you're expecting in this situation is that the doctor will find out or figure out why you've been so sick. That is the thing you are really hoping for. Now the second example, I'm trying to improve my English in hopes that I can earn more money. Now, the thing you are expecting or hoping for is earning more money. And the way to do this is by improving your English.
Maybe after you improve your English, you can start working for an international organization. Number 11, to feel justified in doing something.
If that's what makes you feel justified in solving your problem.
For the pronunciation, the first thing that you have to be aware of is the word feel. And I remember that I already talked about this word before, right? At the beginning when we went over the phrase to fill in for somebody, right? So this word actually has the long E sound. So you say feel, not fill. And the second part is upon the connection between the word justified and then in. Justified ends with the D sound and then in starts with a short E sound. So you link them together here and make a connection for them. Justified in. Justified in. Now say the whole phrase with me. To feel justified in doing something. One more time. To feel justified in doing something.
If you feel justified in doing something, that just means you feel it is plausible or reasonable to do it. In the conversation, Maddie said that if not talking about his struggles made David feel justified in solving his problem, then she would stop asking about it. Now, all this means that if David feels it is more reasonable to not talk about his problems and that it would help him solve them, then she won't ask about it. Now, because of the simplicity of this phrase, we're going to go on to the examples so you have a better understanding. The first one, you should always feel justified in asking for help. This is always really true, especially when you're struggling. We all need help sometimes, and we should all feel it's reasonable or plausible to ask for help. That is why you should always feel justified in asking for help.
And also avoid all the circumstances or environments that you cannot ask for help, because people will make you feel ashamed of having those problems or questions or even needing people's help. Now, coming up to the next example. With my current salary, I feel justified in buying a new home. That means maybe the amount of salary that I'm receiving each and every single month is large enough, is a lot for me to start thinking about affording a new home. And so because of the amount of salary that I earn every single month from my job, I feel that it's reasonable for me to buy a new house or buy a new home.
I think if your salary was less, of course you would not feel justified because it clearly isn't reasonable to buy a new home if you're not making as much. Now, that is why that you're making enough, you feel justified in buying a new home. Number 12, to wring something out of somebody or to wring something from somebody.
Then I'll stop wringing the information out of you.
Now there are two things that we will concentrate on for the pronunciation for this phrase. The first one being the word wring. Ring. You pronounce it exactly the same as you would like the ring. That is a noun. Ring. Ring. Even though this word is spelled with a W, we don't say wo-ring, wo-ring. No. Just ring. Ring. And the last pronunciation point for this phrase is the connecting between out and of. We've already talked about this so many times before, so I'm just going to quickly go over it. We'll bring that t sound over from out to of. Now, of course, don't forget to turn this T sound into a flab D sound. Out of, out of, out of. Now, say this whole thing with me one more time. To wring something out of somebody. To wring something out of somebody. And to wring something from somebody. To wring something from somebody.
When you wring something out of somebody or from somebody, you are trying really, really hard, including putting pressure on them in order for you to obtain the information or the thing that you need. In the conversation, Maddie said that she'd stop wringing the information out of David if he had such good reasons to keep the secret for himself and not sharing with Maddie or anybody in the office. And that's why Maddie stopped asking about it. Now, for you to better use this phrase, let's come up with some examples. And the first one is, interrogators are trained very well in order to bring the truth out of criminals and suspects.
I think this is always a really iconic scene in criminal movies where you see the interrogator trying to wring the information out of the criminals by applying pressure or some other tactics that they are trained for. Now, the second example, be careful to not get involved with blackmailers, otherwise you will be wrung out of your money. Blackmailers will use anything they can to get as much money out of you. If they have any kind of information that you don't want anybody to know, they will use that to get as much money as they can.
That's why you gotta be careful when using your computer or when surfing the internet, because anyone can hack into your computer, your system, in order to get your personal information. And then when you believe that they get information that you don't want to be exposed, then they're gonna ask you for some money in order to keep it secret. Number 13, to talk about somebody behind their back.
And you're right, it's essential to not talk about anyone behind their back, especially within our company.
For the pronunciation, the first thing that you have to be aware of is the connection between the word talk and about. So you bring the k sound at the end of the word talk over to about. You have talk about, to talk about, to talk about. And the second point is upon the word behind. Behind. Don't forget to enunciate the N sound. The N sound, because it's a nasal voice. So behind, behind. And then their back. Behind their back. Now say the whole phrase with me. To talk about somebody behind their back. One more time. To talk about somebody behind their back. To talk about somebody behind their back.
Now, if you talk about somebody behind their back, that means you are bad-mouthing them while they are not there. You are saying terrible things, not anything that is favorable about that person. Maybe you're telling somebody else something that isn't necessarily true, saying something along the lines of, oh, he has terrible work ethic, or, oh, he was so mean to me yesterday, things like that. And of course, this is not a nice thing to do. In the conversation, Maddie said it is essential to not talk about anybody behind their back, especially within the company. So all she's saying is she doesn't want it to sound like she's talking about anybody behind their back, saying anything bad or unfavorable or bad-mouthing them while they're not there. Now let's give you some examples. The first example, those who talk about people behind their back can also be two-faced. Now, all this means is, of course, they're bad-mouthing somebody while they're not there, but they also may pretend like they never did that in the first place, or they might pretend to be friends with that person and then turn around and talk really bad about them when they're not there. That's what it means to be two-faced.
That's why you have to be careful not to be friends with two-faced people, because they're used to talking about other people behind their back. And the next example that I'm about to make will give you more of the idea of why you shouldn't be friends with them. Talking about people behind their back only makes you feel insecure about yourself. And this is so true because when you talk about other people behind their back, you're gonna feel like really insecure. You feel afraid of the same situation happening to you because you're always questioning that, okay, so now if I'm talking about those people behind their back, is there any chance of them doing the same thing? Right? And so because of that, you don't trust them and you don't trust yourself either. And you start becoming a little insecure. And over time, if you get into the habit of talking about people behind their back, I'm pretty sure that you'll grow that insecurity inside of you and to the point that you are not confident anymore and you feel absolutely singled out.
I think that's a really great piece of advice as well. Not only is it educational, but be sure to keep in mind what he just said because that is applicable in your daily life. making sure that you're not bad-mouthing or talking bad about anybody behind their back because it'll make you feel insecure.
Exactly.
Number 14, muttering about somebody or something.
Yes, thank you for your understanding, as I don't want to sound like I'm muttering about anyone or anything at work.
The first thing we're going to look at for this phrase is muttering. Muttering. Don't mistake this word for murdering. That's something completely different. You got to be really careful here. So, muttering. Muttering. Even though it is spelled with the double T, we don't say muttering. Muttering. No. We say muttering. Muttering. Now, the last thing is the connecting between muttering and about. You can bring that ing over to about. Muttering about. Muttering about. Muttering about.
This phrase is another way to talk about somebody or something in a negative sense, but it's completely different from the previous phrase to talk about somebody behind their back, because this phrase is more about complaining to yourself about things or people that you don't like. So you don't go around publicly and say to people that you hate something or you hate somebody. Instead, you keep it all for yourself, but it is still something that you say under your breath sometimes. In the conversation, after deciding not to tell Maddie about the struggles that he had at work, David said that he didn't want to sound like he was muttering about anybody or anyone at work. That means he didn't want anybody to feel like he was complaining about anyone or anything at work. Now, to help you understand how to use this phrase better, let us give you some more examples. And the first one is, it is quite common for a workplace to be filled with muttering about management.
So maybe some people are standing around and they're frustrated about something, saying things like, oh, he never helps with the schedule, or you can never get his attention when you need it. Things like that. They're not really talking to anybody in particular. They're saying things like this out loud to themselves because they're frustrated. And going on to the second example, rather than muttering about your coworker, why don't you try to get along with them? So rather than standing around saying, oh, they never help with work, this isn't going to solve anything, of course. So why don't you try to get along with them and have a good relationship? Maybe they're better than what you think.
I think a lot of people would agree with me that whatever you think or however you think of somebody is going to be exactly the same way that person is going to turn out to be. And so if you don't want somebody to work with you, or you hate them, you dislike working with them, then they're going to turn out to be the exact same person that you don't ever want to be with. And the last one, number 15, to confide in somebody.
And don't forget about me whenever you need somebody to confide in.
Now, just because this phrase is pretty short, so the pronunciation is mainly being focused on the connection between the word confide and in. So confide in, confide in. So for the word confide, make sure you stress the second syllable. So confide, not confide, or confide, or confide, whatever it might be. So confide. And then it ends with the D sound. So you have to make sure that you bring the D sound over to in. You have confide in. Now say the whole phrase with me one more time. To confide in somebody. To confide in somebody. To confide in somebody.
If you confide in somebody, that means that you trust that person enough to talk with them and tell them secrets or even personal information. This person can be called a confidant, if you will. Now, in the conversation, Maddie said to not forget about her whenever he needs somebody to confide in. That just means that she's always willing to listen to David and hear his secrets or even personal information if he trusts her enough. You wouldn't confide in somebody that you don't trust, or you wouldn't confide in somebody that you know will badmouth you later. So that is why you only confide in people that you truly trust. Going on to the examples, the first one, no matter how much we fight, I always confide in my sister whenever I have a problem I can't solve. So obviously my sister is somebody that I trust. I know that she's not going to go off and tell anybody else about it or badmouth me later. So I confide in her and try to get her to help me solve some of my problems.
And sometimes it's really good for us to have somebody that we can confide in when we're sad, when we have a problem, because it's going to help us maintain our mental health. And the next example that I'm about to make is going to follow the exact same line as well. Kids are being taught to have a close friend that they can confide in when they're sad.
That is really true. When I was younger, my mom would mention that, why didn't you tell your friend about it? They could have helped you. And that always really helped me build a great relationship, realizing that I can trust these people with some secrets, personal information, and they would help me if I need.
To get to this level of a relationship, there's a lot of trust involved. Then that's why you have to build, earn, and maintain the trust between the two people.
Now, those are all of the phrases for Conversation 18. Be sure to go back to the conversation and check your understanding. Now, if you don't understand it 100%, watch this video again, shadow along, and come up with your own examples along the way. That way, all of this information is embedded deeper into your mind, and you'd be able to pull it out in daily conversations.
And also, if you like this video and would like to learn more of this in the future, please help support us by liking this video and also subscribing to our channel so you won't miss out any of our future videos. And that's it for today's video, and we'll see you all in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.